Welcome to today's podcast. Our topic today is money talks. How to have candid conversations about money with financial expert Jason Crowley. I'm Rebecca Zung.
And I'm Susan Guthrie. We're excited today to welcome Jason Crowley to our show. He is the founding partner of Divorce Capital Planning, a co-founder of Divorce Mortgage Advisors, the founder of Survive Divorce, and a financial advisor at Capital Planning Partners. He's both a certified divorce financial analyst as well as a chartered financial analyst and certified financial planner. He has extensive training in family law specific mediation and collaborative divorce, and he's a frequent guest speaker on the financial and tax issues in divorce for local organizations and divorce professionals. So we're very happy to have you here with us to talk about this sometimes difficult to talk about topic, money. So thank you, Jason.
Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you too. I was fortunate enough to meet you in person recently. We had a nice little coffee when you were down here in LA not too long ago. You're normally based in Northern California, and we actually met you through Erin Levine, who's one of our faves. She's Hello Divorce is one of our sponsors, and she's also was a guest on our show and a really, really popular topic. So we're excited to meet you and excited to have you on our show and talk about this topic about how to have these money talks. We also had a show called How to Have Difficult Conversations, Divorce Conversations, which we really didn't touch on how to have difficult money conversations. We talked about how to, ask somebody for divorce or how to tell the kids about divorce. But, this topic about money is an interesting thing because obviously a lot of people get divorced because of money problems. So when you approached us with this topic, I thought it was an interesting one. How did you come to this idea about how to have difficult divorce conversations about money?
Yeah, I think it's just over time working with clients, one of the themes that comes up as one of the primary causes of divorce often stems around money issues. I would say really the two that I see time and time again in my practice are infidelity or financial disagreements. And so it's really this theme, and a lot of times one of them relates to the other. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of this really kind of ties back to communication issues or the inability to have kind of these frank conversations. And so, at the end of the day, you really need to have a shared vision around money and have these conversations. And if you're not having them, then I think there's a likely outcome that you're not going to be on the same page. And that's going to actually bleed over into other areas of your relationship. And it's going to be really challenging for you to have a good, healthy relationship. One of the hallmarks of a good marriage, and there's been some studies and research done, and actually it said that 70% of married couples that say that they have a great relationship talk about money regularly and feel that they have a good financial relationship with their spouse. And that's 2 to 3 times the couples that have an okay to in crisis marriage. So it's just one of those really, really critical elements that you need to be able to have these conversations, either whether you're going into a new relationship in a healthy and happy marriage, or if things are starting to go off the rails, any time is a good time. The right time is right now.
Yeah, there's some great points in what you just said, I think, because that communication issue, people ask me as a divorce attorney all the time when I'm getting interviewed, why do you think marriages break down? And it always comes down to every relationship that I see, again, I'm seeing them when they're ready to end, is because the party is not communicating in some way. And I agree with you 100% that the money conversations, it's almost as if they don't have them before they get married. They don't have them while they're married, and they don't want to have them while they're getting divorced, which is why they put everything in the hands of a divorce attorney to negotiate for them. There's so many things around money But what kind of issues do you see people having with money in relationships?
Yeah, just to touch on one of the things that you said, it's not uncommon that I'll have people come in to see me that are kind of on the verge of divorce and they're not sure. They're thinking about, should we stay together? Should we not? What are the financial implications? And sometimes we're able to just kind of put a basic system in place. Really, at the end of the day, all we're doing is actually facilitating a conversation that allows both of them to kind of get on the same page. And I've had that conversation with people coming into me that aren't sure which direction they're going to go. And after the conversation, I would say probably 7 or 8 times out of 10, I don't hear from them again. And I think that's because they actually were able to kind of right the ship as a result of really just having that basic conversation that they've both probably been dying to have for years, but weren't courageous enough to be able to kind of broach that subject after such a long-term marriage.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you mentioned to me when we were talking about doing this topic was potential financial incompatibility. And that intrigued me as well, because that's sort of a different way to think about it other than just, financial issues. I mean, where maybe one party has all the financial knowledge and the other one doesn't, or something like that. Can you talk about financial incompatibility? And then maybe if you have like a crazy story to share, sort of a cautionary tale, that might be good too.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the financial incompatibility, it's not uncommon at all for one spouse to be a saver and one spouse to be a spender. And that comes up kind of time and time again. And I think a lot of this just goes back to, we all have our own relationship with money. We all have our own kind of money story. And so a lot of this really just ties back to how we were raised. Did we grow up wealthy? Did we grow up poor? Did you grow up in a family where you were well off and then things went sideways and now your whole family kind of had to cut back on spending? And whatever your relationship is, whatever your knowledge is that you have around money, that all influences kind of who you are today and how you look at money. And I find that money really is tied up with a lot of times people's insecurities and fears and these different types of things. And so what that can lead to is financial incompatibility. In my mind, I think the way around that is not by being blaming, not by kind of having those conversations where you're trying to say, you're a spender, I'm a saver, my way is the better way, and so this is the way we should be doing it. We really have to take a step back and start with, really, what are your guiding principles? At the end of the day, you're a team. And if you're going to be successful in a marriage, you have to be successful as a team. And so to do that, I think it's really critical that you develop a shared vision as far as what you want your financial future to look like. And that involves having conversations. And if you're not on the same page, that's okay. But you need to be able to get on the same page. It's like in any business or any team. There's going to be plenty of times where different team members have a different view on the direction that they should be going or the tactics involved to get to the end goal. But we have to really figure out what is the finish line and walk out of those types of kind of family financial meetings with this shared vision in order to figure out how you're going to get there. So financial incompatibility is certainly a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to be able to start the conversation and kind of figure out, why are you the way that you are? And once you're able to dig deep, peel back the layers of the onion and figure out kind of what the different levels of incompatibility are, I think that's what kind of sets you up for success, to be able to then have more of those practical conversations as far as, how much should we be saving? Do we need to start a lot of the kind of more financial building blocks, that's where people tend to start, but we're starting at mile 15 instead of starting right at the starting line.
Yeah, I love that tip that you just gave, that, if you have this financial incompatibility, yes, it's a problem, but it's also that opportunity to have this important conversation or share this conversation, and the idea of coming up with that shared vision and then making a plan to get there. But coming up with that shared vision requires having a conversation, right? Sit down and you need to talk about this.
And these things are all interrelated. Like I find in terms of the financial incompatibility, it's not uncommon if I'm sitting down and I'm working jointly with a couple where they come in and one person says, particularly with more affluent couples, one person says how much they spend, and the other person doesn't know if they're saying per month or per year. And just could not be on different wavelengths in terms of, are we spending $10,000 a month or are we spending $120,000 a month? Like literally I've had these types of conversations with some of the higher end clients. And I think a lot of it stems to this financial incompatibility as a starting point, but that's really kind of a symptom. That's not the root cause. And so as a result, when you start to have some of these conversations, you start to see kind of how people are wired. And what they do is they try and create kind of workarounds to avoid having to have those difficult conversations. And so the result of that is that one person manages the finances, the other person's in the dark. The person managing the finances feels like they're shouldering all the responsibility. The other spouse feels like they're not being transparent. And really, there's just a total barrier in terms of being able to make sure that they get on the same page. And all of that just plays forward, and they're starting off, a little bit apart, but that gap just gets wider and wider and wider as time goes by.
That's a very good point. And I've always found when you have that dynamic where one is the one who always handles the money, the other one doesn't really have any idea. There may be some other, maybe that's the stay-at-home parent who's now in charge of the household and raising the children and that sort of thing. But when it comes time then when the marriage breaks down and they're getting divorced, I've always said money is power. And these two people come into the room, I do mostly mediation at this point, and there's almost a power inequity when they walk into the room because money is power. And so the person who doesn't have the knowledge, who didn't have the understanding of how the finances worked, doesn't feel that they come to the table as an equal player. And that can be a very difficult dynamic to break down. Do you deal with that as well at the end of, in the divorce situation, in the scenario where people are breaking up?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really difficult dynamic to overcome because, again, even in more affluent families, I find that there's always fear around money when people are going through divorce. They now are splitting their assets in half or something along those lines. And now their expenses have gone up. So really, regardless of the assets that are involved, there's still a fear that there's going to be a change to some component of lifestyle. And so now fear creeps in, and it's really, really, really hard to make decisions when you're afraid. And that then permeates through all aspects of the agreement, because there's sometimes infidelity is an issue. And so there can be lack of trust that's created as a result of that. And that then bleeds into, is there a lack of trust over how that spouse has been handling finances, and are they hiding assets? And so all of these things really are totally interrelated. It goes to the root of the problem, and it can be really challenging to settle issues. I think that's one of the areas that I feel like a neutral certified divorce financial analyst or an individual working with the non-moneyed spouse can be really helpful to kind of level the playing field so that they feel like they are A, informed, and B, empowered to be able to be educated and kind of make decisions. But it is certainly a challenge to deal with. And I think it's one of those things that once they get up to speed and the other spouse does a good job of being totally transparent and putting all the cards on the table, it's something that can certainly be overcome even in more amicable types of alternative dispute resolution models like collaborative divorce or mediation.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, though, that comes to mind when you're talking about all of this is what I say is there's a big difference between divorce law and divorce justice. And so a lot of times when you've got somebody who is maybe was the cheater or something like that, or you mentioned infidelity, then the other side feels like that person should be punished. And a lot of times they think that they should be punished financially. Because you cheated, I should have more money, or because you cheated, I should pay, less money, or whatever it is. And somehow that morality argument starts getting collapsed in with the financial argument, and people don't think as clearly as maybe they should, I think. And so, and that kind of goes back to the mindset and what you were saying. There's a lot of emotion. Nevin Stanley, who was on our show, had a great quote. He said, "Emotion melts the fortune." I think that that's part of that whole money and mindset thing. We actually had James Goy on our show talking about money and mindset and how to attract money using mind power. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on your money mindset and how that plays in?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things that you touched on is the emotional side. And so just to address that for a second, I think what I find is at the end of the day, you're making decisions based on your priorities, based on what's important to you. And so emotions really are at the core. We don't want to totally remove who you are as an individual, but we do want to make unemotional decisions as much as possible. And I think we tend to be kind of hardwired to make bad financial decisions. And so I think what can be really helpful for people as they're going through a divorce process and they're dealing with what really at its core is the biggest financial transaction of their life, it's important that they look at the financials totally unemotionally. And so oftentimes that involves really looking at the numbers, looking at what the projections are, and looking at what that means for you on a totally unemotional basis, completely objective. From there, once you have that solid foundation in terms of what the numbers actually say, then you can layer in your own priorities and really what is important to you. So we're not removing the emotions, we're only almost compartmentalizing it, is the approach that I often suggest people take as they're thinking about making financial decisions, is look at things unemotionally, then layer in what are your priorities, because almost invariably you're going to need to make choices during this time about what's important to you. Would you rather keep the house and provide that level of stability, or would you rather be able to maintain your lifestyle in other areas? So I think that's one of my big recommendations, is trying to compartmentalize those two. In terms of kind of the money and mindset, like I said, I find that people are really hardwired just to make terrible, terrible financial decisions. We have a lot of different cognitive biases that affect the way that we look at money. Things like overconfidence bias, anchoring bias. It's if you ask someone, what's the likelihood that you think that stock A is going to do X% in return, they'll tell you, oh, I think, with 70% confidence, I think it's going to happen. When even the best stock pickers in the world aren't remotely close to that. And so we see all of those different types of issues creep into how people are approaching a divorce settlement. And again, to me, the biggest thing here is really just, if there's an elephant in the room, it needs to be called out. And so when we can bring these different types of issues to people's attention, and they can identify what types of biases are at play here, then at least they have some level of self-awareness around that. And that can be really super, super helpful in terms of being able to move forward and move past that piece.
Yeah, I'm thinking as we're talking here, and we're talking mostly about adult conversations between partners here. It strikes me that in my household, we have a different type of conversation going on around money right about now. We have my three stepchildren are all 21, just about to sort of launch themselves into adulthood. And so we're having a lot of conversations about, money, about finances, and realizing that perhaps we didn't do the best job ever preparing them to launch into adulthood when they don't have a great grasp or concept of, what it costs to live a certain lifestyle, or what they need to do. And I think that may be sort of endemic, right? I think a lot of parents may have glancing conversations with their kids, but maybe not deep dive conversations. What are your thoughts about having difficult conversations with your kids about money?
I mean, look, your kids are going to learn about money from someone. And so you either have the ability to control that conversation, or they're going to go ahead and learn it from the Instagram guru that they see, who's showing them about Lambos and trying to push different types of online courses. And so I think number one, that's the most important thing to know, is these conversations are going to be happening. They're going to learn about money from someone. And if you don't have that conversation, they're going to learn it from somewhere else. So it doesn't matter that you do it exactly right. What matters is that you have that conversation. And money is kind of taboo in our society. Different parents have different levels of comfort in terms of whether they want to talk about the specifics as far as how much they make and how much they spend. And I don't think that's really what's the most important thing. To me, what's important is, you want to start early. Kids are very receptive to having conversations about money from a young age, even when they may not really understand the nuances of what it is that they're talking about. You can help break these things down in really easy to understand terms by talking to them about conceptual things and values. And so I would suggest starting at an early age. I know this is one of the areas that I feel really grateful and really blessed. My father was a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley for almost 50 years. And so he wasn't the most open in terms of, here's how much I make, here's what the cost is for us to maintain our lifestyle. But he was really, really good about educating me and sharing different concepts. And so I remember when I was 7 years old and I was sitting down and he was showing me kind of an account statement, and I noticed that my Bank of America savings account was paying a lower interest rate than my Morgan Stanley savings account. And so at that point, I decided I was going to pull my money out of B of A and move it over into my Morgan Stanley account. This was my first arbitrage opportunity. I had no idea what that meant at the time. So I pulled out all the money that I had saved doing lemonade stands and birthday money. And then I got a letter from the B of A CEO. Now, it clearly wasn't from the B of A CEO, but to me, it was. And he was telling me that he wanted my business back. I felt like I was a big deal. And that really kind of set it up where that gave me confidence in dealing with money. That one event really, I think, is pivotal because it really gave me a lot of confidence in terms of how I view and think about money going forward. And so it was really a small item, but it's something that has really blossomed over the years. And I think probably is one of many reasons that I do what I do now and why I'm so passionate about kind of promoting financial literacy. So to me, it's make it age appropriate, start early, have some of these conceptual value-based conversations. And then as time goes on and they get older, you can start sharing some of the specifics and implement some sort of a system to help them actually take ownership about things, whether that's sharing in some sort of a big purchase, saving for a big purchase, learning a little bit about how debt works, all of these different types of things. And, I think one of the other big benefits of this is, in order to break down a concept for kids, you have to really simplify it. And that forces you to really start to build an understanding of it at a much deeper level than we often do if you're not in this business every day. And so I think it can help reinforce some of the ways that you should approach money yourselves, because you want to model that behavior for your kids.
Oh, lots and lots of really good advice there. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to have conversations with your spouse. It's funny because in my household, my husband is certainly financially savvy, knows what he's doing. He's a lawyer and all of that, but he really lets me just handle everything. And I often say to him, I tell him what I'm doing or I tell him what's going on, because I joke with him. I'm like, I don't want to drop over dead and have you have no idea where anything is. So I sort of like make him know. Obviously he trusts me, but what advice do you have for having these candid conversations, especially if somebody is what we would call the non-moneyed spouse or the out spouse, with trying to get the other side to share with them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different issues that are at play there, and you kind of need to break down, what is the cause of if one party is not interested in having those conversations, what's the real reason for that? Is it that they really have no interest, or is it a division of labor? So start with understanding, kind of, like I said, with the money story, start with understanding kind of how they're wired, why they're wired that way, what their background is around that, so you can understand what the obstacle or impediment is. And that will then allow you to be more thoughtful about how to approach that conversation. But a couple kind of more practical ideas. One is I would carve out time and try and do it in a way that incorporates some sort of fun. So, a lot of times when we're doing like a business planning strategy session, we'll do a business planning retreat where with my business partner, we'll go to a place for the weekend and we go to a nice place and that kind of forces us to get away from the day-to-day, get away from the minutia and have the conversations about the bigger picture stuff that we want to get aligned on. And I think you can take that same approach when you're talking with your spouse about financial issues. Maybe it's going away for the day or the weekend, getting away from the kids and being able to kind of have that conversation. And so the first day is going to be kind of focused on having some of these conversations. And then in the evenings and the following day, you're going to be able to kind of enjoy some fun and set up a structure around it. So I think that's one of the things that you can try and do. Another suggestion would be thinking about having some sort of a financial report, at least an annual report. And if you're tracking your finances, whether you're doing it kind of manually with the Excel spreadsheet type of approach, or whether you're using one of the online budgeting and financial tracking apps, I think it makes sense to, at the very least, prepare an annual report that says, here's what our net worth looks like. Here's what all the accounts are. Here's how much is in it. Here's where it was last year. Here's how much we spent. Here's how much we made. All of that doesn't take a ton of time. Maybe you have to carve out an hour or two to kind of put that together. And then by putting together a one-pager, you're now tracking your progress. You're getting the other person up to speed, and they have something that's documented and written that they can review and go back to see where everything is. And then periodically, you can kind of put a plan in place for here are all the different types of things that we want or need to tackle as we go forward. So again, this starts with developing that shared vision, then creating the long-term goals. And from there, now it's checking the boxes in terms of, do we have the estate planning in place? And you don't have to do everything at once, but you want to work through those. So those are a couple ideas in terms of how to approach that conversation. But I think the biggest thing is you have to be non-blaming. You have to open up the conversation so it is kind of a two-way street and really seek to understand, as opposed to just saying, I'm the one who's been managing this. I have this kind of power and control, and so I want to bring you along for the ride. Make it a two-way street as much as you possibly can.
So those are great tips for having the conversation with your spouse. I'm wondering how you would tweak those tips to have the conversation with your soon-to-be ex-spouse. So now you're going into divorce.
Probably not going on a retreat.
Yes, I'm assuming there's a few tweaks, but how about sharing a few of those with our listeners? Because many of them, unfortunately, are at that point.
So one is, don't be afraid to bring in professional help. Whether that means that you're talking with a marriage counselor, I think it's important that the marriage counselor doesn't go too far into the weeds and the nuances of the finances unless they're equipped to deal with that, which most don't have the financial background and training, or whether you're talking to a neutral financial professional, whether it's you're a financial advisor or a certified divorce financial analyst to facilitate those conversations. Those can be, I think, really helpful, particularly if you're entering into a discussion about divorce or you're moving forward with that path. Oftentimes you need someone that's neutral, who can deal with some of the kind of communication challenges and help facilitate that conversation so you're both able to hear each other and understand where you're both coming from. And that can be what gets you over the hump in order to enable you to have that conversation. Frankly, it's just a lot of people that are coming off a long-term marriage, the dynamic is so deep, you each have your own narratives. And so it's great to come in with an open mind and try to have these conversations, but sometimes you can do more harm than good.
Oh yeah. I always say that no one knows how to push your buttons like your soon-to-be ex-spouse. They definitely know exactly where to go.
Yeah,
exactly. So, we all have these triggers, and it's almost hard not to push those buttons when you have an emotional conversation like this. So I think my biggest advice there is talk to an expert. Talk to either an individual who's going to be settlement oriented, even if you want, like sometimes I have clients that don't want to work with me as a neutral because they want someone that's looking out for their interests. And I think that in a lot of times, that's actually the most conducive way to help them get to the finish line in a settlement-oriented and amicable fashion. But that's because I'm not someone that's going to come in and try to blow up the deal and tell them everything that they should be looking for and everything that they need to get. Instead, I try and approach that as someone who's, even though I'm working for them and looking out for their interests, I'm still trying to look at both sides, explain both sides to the story, because what I find is at the end of the day, when you reach a settlement that isn't imposed on you by the judge, almost without fail, both sides feel like they've made bigger concessions. That's not possible.
Yeah, that always happens.
Right?
Always. There's no doubt. Exactly. So this has been really, really interesting. Unfortunately, we are about out of time. So it went really fast.
It did.
Good. I hope it was entertaining.
Because money talks. So, but Jason, we want to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you. So can you give us your contact information, and we will put it in the show notes?
Sure. So you can find us on any of our websites. Our divorce mortgage advisors is at www.divorcemortgageadvisors.com. Our divorce financial planning company, if you're in California, is at www.divorcecapitalplanning.com. And then kind of our main authority site that has a ton of resources, information, guides for all aspects of divorce, whether it's co-parenting, legal information, divorce finances, and really through all aspects or all phases of divorce, whether you're contemplating, going through, or post-divorce. That's at survivedivorce.com. So at any of those, you'll be able to reach me. We also have a couple great Instagram profiles as well. So one of those is at Survive Divorce. And the other one, if you're looking for a little bit of levity, then you can check us out at Fuck Divorce as well.
And that's the uncensored version.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, it was great having you here, Jason. I'm really glad that you were able to come by our show and share all your wisdom. I know that it's going to be helpful for so many people. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.